everyone. Welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. We are back again this week. We're very happy to have on the show today Erin Maile O'Keefe. She is with us here in the studio. And Erin is all about movement, inclusion, connection, community activating, and play. She founded the Human Connection Project, which focuses on creative placemaking, arts in the community, projects that include and engage everyone. She also co-founded the Tiny House Fest Vermont, and she's taught and shared her skills all over the world, including places like Kripalu, Morris Arts, and Yestermorrow, which is an interesting, innovative design build school in Waitsfield. We are happy to have Erin. Hi, Erin.
Hi, Wendy. Nice to be here.
It's great to have you
in
on the
person.
show. In person.
Yes.
In person, no plexi.
Yes.
Yeah. It's exciting for us as well. There's so many things to talk to you about, and so many different projects that you're involved in this community, but also further afield. So, what I found out, which I did not know, is that you were born and raised in Hawaii.
Yes, I was. Yeah, I'm very far from home.
You're very
living in New England.
You
yeah.
are. And your family is, your mother's side of the family
Yes.
is Native Hawaiian.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what it was like? You were growing up in the 60s and 70s there.
Mm-hmm.
What was it like in Hawaii?
Well, it's interesting. I only really get to reflect on how it was different by living here on the mainland, but never had a childhood here. I think the thing to point out about Hawaii is that it's very much a melting pot. Like there's a lot more diversity in Hawaii than there are in a lot of places in the U.S. And because we're on an island, there's also there's a closer knit of community. Especially when my mom grew up there, and when my grandmother grew up there as well. There's a sense of it being a small, interconnected place, even now with population being much, much larger. Yeah. So we could roam and people knew us. Yeah. You know, everyone was kind of had eyes on everyone and all the kids. And so there was a lot of freedom as a result. There was no way to go very far because you're on an island.
Yes. What city was it?
In Honolulu.
It was in Honolulu,
yeah.
Yes. And you were also following in the footsteps of, one of our presidents, I believe.
Yes. I did not know him, but older sisters of my friends knew him because he was only 4 years older than me.
Oh.
Punahou, yeah.
And you went to the same school?
Same school, yeah. We have the same favorite teacher as well.
Really?
Yes.
That's so
Mrs.
cool.
Mabel Hefty. Rest her soul.
So you've heard him speak about her?
He wrote about her,
He did.
Yeah, she had actually gone to Kenya the year before he found his way to her classroom.
How interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, that must have been very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the 2008 election must have been something for you.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. It's very exciting.
When you were growing up, you did mention that both your mother and your grandmother were very often involved in public events and the community, too.
Yeah, I find myself over the years, ever since college actually, running festivals, designing and running festivals. And my grandmother ran festivals, and so did my mom. So I kind of grew up being a young person, helping out, and I say I come by it very naturally in my lineage.
Yeah, well, that's part of your growing. Yeah, you were comfortable in that kind of situation. And was it also performance?
There was performance involved in the festivals, but I think my view and my grandmother, my mom's view, were really about being directors and kind of orchestrating things and designing those festivals.
Yes. And were they things specific to Hawaii?
Yeah, cultural festivals.
Cultural festivals.
Yeah. So it's interesting, the work that I've done here on what's called the mainland, right? Has been a way of like understanding culture where I am, but also being more inclusive of other cultures.
Yes.
As we know, people move around the planet. And so how do we weave those cultures together?
Yeah.
And I carry with me my Hawaiian culture, which is a very inclusive, welcoming culture.
Yes.
Modern Hawaiian culture has Filipino culture and Chinese and Japanese and Tahitian, and so it is also a weaving, and there's a celebration or co-celebration of everyone's culture in Hawaii.
And you do go back there
Yes.
to visit.
Yeah, at least once a year.
Yeah.
Not in the last 2 years.
Right,
but yeah,
right. Yes, hopefully soon.
hopefully soon.
So you went on to come to the mainland for college, and you studied architecture at Cornell. How did you get to architecture?
I was always a mover, so I danced since I was very, very young. So spatial relationships were very important. I think it might have been something that was just inherent to my understanding of pretty much everything. But then it was also cultivated by my love of dance. My grandmother was a hula teacher, and so I danced hula before any form of dance, and then went on to study ballet and modern and tap and Tahitian as well, but that also came with hula. And so that understanding of space came from actually a somatic understanding of movement. And then I just really also loved the crafting of spaces. So I just remember being 7 years old and saying, I'm going to be an architect.
Ah,
Yeah.
and you followed that for a while?
I did.
Yeah.
I did. I made my way to college to study architecture. Did it for 2 years. It didn't match up with my image of what it was going to be. Also was in a dance company and then moved towards fine arts. And then designed and produced my first multidisciplinary arts festival.
Oh, when you were in college?
Yeah.
Ah, so it's in your blood.
Yeah.
It's so in your blood.
Totally.
Yeah. I would think that moving from Hawaii to Ithaca was a huge change just in terms of climate alone, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
There was a very, very oversized wool coat involved in me making it through my first winter.
And so at some point you meet Kevin O'Keefe, who was to become your husband. You ended up in Brattleboro. So how did that happen?
I was living in New York City. I decided I wanted to live there at least for a few years before I potentially was going home to Hawaii. And in that time I met Kevin. And so he was a strong magnet to stay on the East Coast. And he was actually ready to leave New York City when I first met him, and I wasn't quite ready. So in those years, we started to look at places outside of New York City where we might want to live, and we're looking for markers of community. And because I had had an experience in Ithaca, which I loved, I was looking for some of the things I saw there, which was, a farmer's market, a food co-op, independent bookstores and coffee shops, and no mall. I kind of focused in on Vermont because I loved the politics. And it's interesting because Hawaii and Vermont align a lot in terms of politics, in terms of what's important in the social landscape, in terms of even if we look at COVID numbers and protocols and a feeling of responsibility to the community. There's a lot of alignment. So Kevin knew Stephen Stearns, and Stephen asked him to come up and do a circus, and he said, I think I found our town.
Stephen Stearns,
Yeah.
another magnet.
Yeah,
Yes.
totally.
And at that time, Kevin was doing circus primarily, is that right?
Yeah, and he still does.
And he still does, Circus Minimus. We are going to have Kevin on the show. He's on the list, and we're going to get there. You did circus yoga with him as well, and the two of you would go out together and do some teaching?
Yeah, so when we met, I was really more from dance and yoga, and he was more from the world of theater, circus, and yoga.
Yeah.
And we kind of just merged them together as we played, and did a kind of merging of architecture, partner acrobatics, and yoga, and came up with a practice called circus yoga.
Yeah.
And we worked multi-generationally because that was what both of us had worked in schools, had worked with kids, and also had been doing some adult teaching. And I really wanted to figure out how to have the generations learn together.
Yes. Yeah.
Instead of having everyone kind of isolated in their own learning circle. And that's what we ended up doing, is creating circus yoga, which really is it connects a lot of different communities, but it can also connect generations.
Yeah, and in your teaching, I know in the workshops that you've done and the projects, the many projects you've done, you've always been very fine-tuned to the fact of bringing in people who have different abilities, veterans, different ages, as you say. So that's on your radar.
Yeah. There's something about a somatic practice that is beyond language. There's so often we rely a lot on our verbal skills to get us through our feelings of conflict or disconnection. And because that's the kind of learner I am, I guess, I really believe in play and the body being able to bridge a lot of difference. So the other thing is around culture. So I was fortunate enough to grow up with a culture that was fairly intact. I mean, certainly I had, a lineage of white males in my line, and so there was a bit of culture clash, but I still also, in Hawaii, the culture went underground. It didn't disappear.
Right.
And my grandmother was part of the generation of kupuna, or elders, and particularly women that were raised when they couldn't speak Hawaiian in the street. They were forbidden. They couldn't dance hula out in public. And so when she became an adult, she really took that on, along with a lot of women of her generation, to bring the culture out into the public again. And so the work that I do feels like that as well. It feels like, let's make evident the culture that's here, and then also let's leave space in the middle for us to co-author the culture that we want to grow.
Yes.
So it's been an interesting year and a half. I've done a lot of reflection, and I think a lot of us have taken time to reflect on our lives and our work, and I've been doing a lot of thinking and writing about that.
I'm sure that's going to come out in your work as well.
It feels very powerful right now.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of connective tissue like that going on, among many different cultures. Every day, every week, we hear about another culture, which is such a similar story. And so to bring that out is a really exciting thing to happen. You spoke about having 4 principles that you abide by. And what I love about them is that they are expansive. Principles are usually, things that you have to follow, and they're quite mental. Let's hear about yours.
Yeah, and they feel very foundational.
Yeah.
And I just want to say I'm really grateful to all of the people that have come into the circle of our learning around, and circus yoga, which is really now is I call the human art of play. Really, it was a magnet for so many great people, and being able to distill our practice down to 4 principles really helped as like a foundation. And so, and what I realized in that process was that these 4 principles really guided me no matter what I was doing, whether I was teaching or leading a festival or even having a conversation with someone I didn't know. And the first principle, it also provides a map for structuring an experience. So when I design a curriculum, or I design a workshop, or I design a festival, these 4 principles guide an arc. It's it really is sort of like, if in dancer parlance, it's the score. So inclusion is first. So how do people walk through that door? And how do we make sure that it's not just a welcome mat, but to really look at the friction or where there's a rub, where it's difficult for someone to walk through that door, where there's self-exclusion. So inclusion isn't just like welcome, it's like looking at what prevents folks from coming in. And then how do I, or how do we make it more accommodating? How do we make sure that we're translating into their language? how do we make sure that we're listening carefully enough that we might understand that something that seems innocuous to one person feels maybe threatening to someone else. So there's a lot of questions of ourselves that we have to have in that moment of inclusion and that threshold.
Yes, yes.
And then the second is connection. So that connections within ourselves. So how do I provide experiences for individuals to be able to make connections within themselves, within their thinking, within their body parts, within their relationships to people that they came in the room with, within relationships to others they don't know, and within the relationship of the whole, and feel like they truly belong and they're connected to the whole. And then the third principle is co-authorship. So in any experience, I really believe that there has to be an open center. And often that open center I can infuse with a question, but it's never there with an answer or a result that is expected, that there is that space there so that everyone can bring their voice and everyone can contribute to whatever happens. So that's where the co-authorship happens. And that's when the magic happens too. Because I'm a facilitator. I oftentimes don't even call myself a teacher, but I'm facilitating. I'm container building, and then I'm allowing what happens there. And then the last one is empathy. So ultimately, if all of those steps are successful, we're all creating greater empathetic capacity in ourselves and in the whole community.
That's a great lineup, and it's just so it expands everything. You know, just by you being able to articulate it, you know, it's like, oh, that's another way of looking at things. That's another way of relating to someone, and it goes back to the self, and you have a reciprocity there, you know, that you usually don't have in a group of people. And also antenna, you know, having your antenna and being aware. You know, with you articulating it, it sounds like a lot of different things, but I imagine the way that you have used it over the years, it comes very naturally.
And I've never unearthed it. You know, it's for me, it's holding those questions of like, how do I create inclusion in this moment? How do I create connection in this moment? So they're all embedded in a question that is answered based on that moment in time, that constellation of people.
Ever changing, and you never know what's going to happen, right?
And the environment.
That's right.
Right. So it's always changing, and it keeps me alert, and it keeps me as an equal learner and participant, even though I am facilitating as well. But I'm still learning.
Yes, it's part of the whole. It's part of the whole thing. Yeah. It's very exciting. It's a very exciting approach.
It's definitely helped me a lot,
and it works.
So far.
Let's talk about the Human Connection Project. I know that's an umbrella for
Yes.
many of the things that you're doing in town and other things that you've been doing elsewhere. So if you could just talk about some of the things that that includes.
Okay. So, I mean, basically the Human Connection Project gave me like my container of like all these projects I do. So on some level, it looks like I'm doing all these different projects going in different directions, but really they do actually have a basis, a connection, and the principles describe that, but also they are all based in human connection. And the idea that it's a project is like these are all different iterations of that. So so it was just kind of an organizing, it was a wonderful organizing title. For what I do.
I love this term that you use, creative placemaking, and I know that that has followed through almost everything you've done, and obviously, you know, in your background as well.
That is a term that was coined by, and I'm going to forget his name, but he ran the National Endowment for the Arts, and I think he coined it maybe 15 years ago, maybe. And when I heard about it, I was like, oh, that's what I do. And then I went on to kind of study it. The work that I wanted to do is, instead of working so much by tuition and working with in particular institutions like schools. I wanted to take my work and move more towards whole communities, and then work with partners within that community. So both, nonprofits as well as governmental organizations, as well as private citizens. So that's kind of where my work started to go.
Under this umbrella, you've been working with Waterways, which is part of the Ask the River project.
The Waterways project is a project that the partners are the Brattleboro Housing Partnerships. They have Melrose Terrace, which a lot of people know, was flooded in Irene, and they had to move all of the inhabitants there. They had to move all of the residents there to a new place at Exit 1, Red Clover Commons. So as I've been taking down the buildings, I inquired about were they thinking about using this space as public space, and Chris Hart said yes, and her eyes lit up, and I said, well, let's talk. And so I said, I can work with you on the programming part of that. So the Waterways project, we brought in other partners, including Bonnievale Environmental Education Center, the Connecticut River Conservancy, and then a number of different artists in the community. And the point, the mission of Waterways is to gather the community at that location and to learn more about it, about the whetstone, about that particular part of land. And my Beneke teacher is Auntie Judy Dow, and she has really taught me about how to look at the land from an Abenaki indigenous perspective, and how is that land used, and why did the Abenaki not live in that part of the land? It's in a bend of the waterway. You wouldn't live there. That's where animals would go. That's where it floods. That's where you might hunt, or you might go down and you might be working on your tools there, but you would never live there. You would live in higher ground.
Yeah, right.
So something as simple as that, like looking back to the original people of this land and understanding it. So bringing in Judy Dow into that project and really re-educating us around the health of the waterway through the Connecticut River Conservancy, understanding the plants and animals through Bonnievale Environmental Education Center, and then also looking at it from an indigenous perspective through Judy Dow and other indigenous educators. And then as we gather the community to do that, after our co-education, then we can decide, what do we do? How do we co-evolve with the whetstone here at this place?
Yes, yes. And you're taking all your 4 principles at the same time. That's a beautiful example of placemaking. And it works for everyone in the community to take part in it as well. Erin, again, there's so many things under the Human Connections Project, and one of which, during the pandemic, you came up with this brilliant idea of having handy stations. They were called handy stations, and many folks in the community, I'm sure, have seen them. They were at the library. There was one on Main Street. They were around town where you could go and sanitize your hands. So that was a little engineering project you had, and also one that made a big difference in our community. One thing that's happening now, Erin, that's really wonderful is the invigoration of Gallery Walk. And you, I know Stephanie Bonin, there are many other people, you can name names. Please, I always encourage shout outs. And it's been wonderful because they have been fabulous and lively. The weather hasn't always cooperated, but can you talk a little bit about what's happening with that now?
Yeah, so the reinvigoration of Gallery Walk. It's great. It was a great opportunity for us to return to social, the social in downtown, and also to reinvigorate downtown commerce as well. So I worked with Stephanie Bonin and Aaron Skaggs on this, and I came and brought the piece of Artful Streets. They did a beautiful job of working with the local galleries. I helped in some of those conversations. They also worked on closing a street on Elliott and bringing music and a new marketplace for those that don't have brick and mortar. And the part that I brought was Artful Streets. So the piece that we really identified was missing was this way that we had more social engagement in our streets. So a couple things. One is because Gallery Walk tends to prioritize those that have brick and mortar, there needed to be a place for our community members that were artists and for our local organizations that didn't have presence downtown to have presence. And then the other thing is to have more social engagement and artistic engagement. So how do we have our townspeople be the makers?
Right.
How is everyone become an artist during Gallery Walk? So in this way, we're working with organizations and with artists and activities that are really engaging in these little interstitial spaces. And then hopefully the long-term outcome, which is kind of a creative placemaking goal, is how does some of these pop-up stations give rise to something that might be long-term in our downtown? Because we could really use more public spaces.
That's wonderful. It's like planting seeds, right? You are planting these seeds that, who knows what will happen. Gallery Walk is coming up. September Gallery Walk will be coming up. And for people to do a little exploring and to see what's out there, and I think people will be really surprised. It's been invigorating for the community.
And I do want to make a really specific invitation to the community for September and October, as people have started to get used to these Artful Streets stations. Is the theme in September is Technicolor Town. So the themes are wide in terms of their interpretation. And so folks have an idea of how to paint our town with greater amount of color and interests and make it more spectacular. Please reach out to me. A couple of ideas that we're doing is we're inviting the businesses and building owners in downtown to use lights to light up their facades. We also will have a couple of different brigades that will be going around town the night before to decorate. We'll also have what I'm calling right now the tunnel of Technicolor transformation, where you come in one end and you will get this Technicolor makeover by a series of artists in our community, from head to toe, hair, makeup, clothing.
Fabulous.
And you come out the other side there's a runway. So it's an opportunity for us to just turn up the volume on our color and pizzazz.
It's so exciting.
In town. And then in October is I See You Brattleboro, and this is an opportunity for us to really see who is Brattleboro. Who is Brattleboro? And we'll see that through photography and portrait painting and any other ideas that the community has to be able to really show us visually who we are as a really diverse, dynamic, varied town.
Exciting. And people are welcome to get in touch with you.
Yes,
and
please do.
Erin's information will be here at the end of the show for people to do that. Keep your eye on Erin. Keep your eye on what's happening in downtown Brattleboro, because it's a surprise. It's going to be a surprise, and it's going to evolve. And the seeds are being planted.
Go Brattleboro.
Go Brattleboro. Thank you so much, Erin.
Thanks, Wendy.
It was lovely.
This is great.
So everyone, be prepared for Gallery Walk, which is coming up very soon in September and October, and it's the first Friday of every month. Again, Erin's information is here at the end of this show. So stay tuned. Keep your antenna out for the other person in the community that you pass on the street or that you see at the library or walking down the road, whatever. Just stay in touch. We'll see you next week.